Rose regained her senses slowly, as if swimming up from the depths of a dark, viscous pool. The first thing she noticed was the cold, a deep biting chill that seemed to seep into her very bones. It was a stark contrast to the warmth of the campfire, the heat of Lyra's touch. Lyra. The memory hit her like a physical blow, driving the air from her lungs. The wine, the kiss, the betrayal. It all came rushing back in a dizzying wave of emotion. Rose forced her eyes open, blinking against the harsh light that assaulted her vision. She tried to move, to sit up, but found herself unable. Her limbs were held fast, bound by something cold and unyielding. Panic surged through her as reality came crashing in. She was in a cell, the stone walls damp and cold against her bare skin. Bare skin. With a jolt of horror, she realized she was completely naked, her clothing and armor stripped away, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. And she wasn't alone. Well, well, a voice drawled from the shadows, a voice that sent chills down Rose's spine. Look who's finally awake. Rose knew that voice, had heard it in her nightmares for years. She'd hoped to never hear it again. Draven stepped into the light, his scarred face twisted into a cruel smile. He looked down at her, his eyes roving over her naked form with a mixture of disdain and dark amusement. Hello, Rose, he said softly, crouching down beside her. It's been a while. Rose tried to speak, to spit defiance in his face, but found her voice muffled by a gag, the fabric cutting into the corners of her mouth. She thrashed against her bonds instead, the chains rattling loudly in the small space, but they held fast. She was completely immobilized, helpless. Now, Draven tutted, reaching out to stroke a finger down her cheek. Rose flinched away from his touch, revulsion churning in her gut. There's no need for that. You're not going anywhere. He stood up, circling her prone form like a predator toying with its prey. I must say I'm impressed. When Lyra first proposed this little arrangement, I had my doubts, but she played her part perfectly. At the mention of Lyra's name, Rose's eyes darted around the cell, searching for any sign of her, any hint that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. A tiny part of her, despite everything, still clung to the hope that Lyra would appear and explain everything, that there was some reason behind this betrayal. But when Lyra did step into view, that fragile hope shattered into a million cutting shards. She stood next to Draven, her face a mask of cold indifference. Gone was the warmth, the affection, the playful spark that had drawn Rose to her like a moth to a flame. In its place was a stranger, someone Rose had never truly known at all. We had a deal, Lyra said, her voice hard and businesslike as she addressed Draven. I delivered her to you as promised. Now you release my family. Draven waved a dismissive hand. Yes. They'll be freed within the hour. You've served your purpose well. Lyra nodded, but her eyes flickered to Rose just for a moment. In that brief glance, Rose saw a flash of something. Regret, sorrow, a silent apology, before the mask slipped back into place. Goodbye, Rose, Lyra said softly. And without another word, she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the cold silence of the cell until they faded into nothing. Rose screamed into her gag, a muffled cry of rage and despair and heartbreak. She thrashed against her chains with renewed vigor, the metal biting into her skin, rubbing it raw. But it was useless. She was trapped, helpless, utterly at the mercy of her greatest enemy. Draven watched her struggle, amusement playing across his twisted features. He seemed to revel in her anguish, to drink it in like a fine wine. Oh, Rose, he sighed, shaking his head in mock pity. Did you really think someone like you could find happiness? Could find love? He crouched down again, bringing his face close to hers, so close she could feel his breath on her skin. You're a weapon, Rose. A tool to be used and discarded. And now you're mine. Rose glared at him with all the hatred and defiance she could muster, pouring every ounce of her rage into her gaze. But deep inside, in a place she hardly dared acknowledge, a small, traitorous part of her wondered if he was right. She had let herself trust, let herself care, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found something real with Lyra. And look where it had gotten her. Naked, alone, betrayed in the most intimate way possible by the one person she thought she could count on. As Draven's laughter echoed off the damp stone walls, as the full, cold reality of her situation sank in like a lead weight in her gut, Rose felt something inside her harden like molten metal cooling and solidifying into an unbreakable blade. Lyra had broken her heart. Draven thought he had broken her spirit. But they were both wrong. Rose was the wielder of the flame heart, the survivor of Eldermire, the guardian who had faced down darkness time and time again and emerged on the other side. She would not be broken by this. She would endure, as she had always endured, and when the time was right, she would make them pay. The cold, hard stone floor pressed into her bare skin. The iron shackles bit into her flesh, but deep within her core, an ember still smouldered. The Flameheart's fire, banked low but never truly extinguished. Rose closed her eyes, shutting out Draven's gloating face, Lyra's cold betrayal, the hopelessness of her current predicament. Instead, she focused inward, conserving her strength, gathering her rage and her pain, and her unbreakable will into a hard, sharp point. Biding her time, waiting for her moment, the moment when she would remind them all of who she truly was. Rose, the wielder of the Flameheart, and she would not be broken. Rose lay on the cold obsidian floor, her naked body chained and her mouth gagged. Draven loomed over her, his scarred face twisted in a cruel smirk. "Not so fierce now, are you?" he taunted. With a rough yank, he removed the gag from her mouth, but instead of screams or pleas, laughter bubbled up from Rose's throat. Soft at first, then building into a crescendo of manic mirth that echoed off the dark stone walls. Draven's smirk faltered, confusion and unease flickering across his features. "What's so funny?" Rose's laughter died down to a chuckle. She smiled up at him, a slow, predatory baring of teeth. "You must not remember why I wear my armor," she purred. "It was for your protection, not mine." Draven scoffed but took an unconscious step back. "You're in no position to make threats, girl." Rose's smile widened. She closed her eyes, delving deep within herself, to that place of molten fury and betrayal and pain. With a thought, she unleashed it all. Fire exploded outwards from her body in a white-hot nova of unrestrained rage. The chains binding her melted instantly, glowing rivulets of molten metal dripping from her bare skin. Rose stood slowly, the polished obsidian floor bubbling and deforming under her bare feet with each step as she advanced on Draven. "Rose, wait!" Draven stumbled backwards, his eyes wide with sudden, horrified realization. Rose stalked forward, her hips swaying with deliberate, sensual menace. "What's the matter, lover?" she crooned. "I thought you wanted me." She reached out with one burning finger to trace the line of his jaw. Draven screamed as her touch seared his flesh, the scent of charred meat filling the air. When she lifted her finger, a perfect blackened rose was branded into his cheek. "I'm leaving now," Rose informed him calmly, as if discussing the weather. "And you had better pray to every god you know that we never cross paths again." She turned and sauntered away, taking great care to put an extra sway in her hips as Draven's agonized whimpers echoed behind her. Her bare feet left glowing, molten footprints in the dark stone. She paused only to collect her bag of gear as she exited, ignoring the guards that rushed to block her path. They barely had time to raise their weapons before they crumbled to ash, swept away by the wave of Rose's passing. Rose walked out into the cold night air, her rage-fueled fires finally dimming. And then As the adrenaline faded, the full weight of Lyra's betrayal crashed into her like a physical blow. A wail tore itself from her throat, a sound of pure anguish and heartbreak. Unheeding of her naked state, Rose ran, bare feet pounding on the rough ground, uncaring of the direction, only knowing she needed to be away, to be somewhere safe, somewhere she could let herself shatter. Instinct and some deep, primal memory drew her to Eldermire, to its ruins that still reeked of unstable magic. She didn't slow as she approached the pulsing, fractured portal. With a sob, she dove headlong into its stuttering depths. The unstable energies crackled over her skin, sinking into her pores, stabilizing the raging heat that threatened to consume her. Rose tumbled through the void between realms, letting the magic drain away her excess power and, hopefully, some of her pain. She had been betrayed. Again. She had opened her heart and had it ripped bleeding from her chest. Never again, she vowed silently as the portal spat her out onto some foreign soil. Never again would she let herself be so vulnerable, so weak. Rose curled into herself, naked and shivering and alone, and let the tears come. Let herself feel it, this agony of shattered trust, of broken faith. And then, when the tears ran dry and a cold, hard nugget of resolve crystallized in her core, she rose, bloody but unbroken, naked but unashamed, betrayed but never again to be made a fool. She would endure, as she always had, and woe to any who dared stand in her way. Rose slowly sat up, her bare skin prickling with goosebumps as a cool breeze danced across the sandy shore. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the soft, pre-dawn light that painted the horizon in gentle hues of pink and gold. She stood, absently brushing sand from her bare thighs as she took in her surroundings. The great lake stretched out before her, its waters calm and mirror-smooth, reflecting the vibrant colours of the sky. Behind her, a line of trees hugged the shoreline, their leaves rustling in the breeze, and there, in the distance, the unmistakable silhouette of a city skyline. Tall buildings reached towards the sky, glinting in the growing light. It was a jarring sight after the untamed beauty of the lake and the aurora-streaked sky. Rose frowned, a pang of uncertainty rippling through her. The city looked different, more angular, more modern than anything she'd seen in the realms she'd visited. Glass and steel glittered where she was used to seeing stone and timber. She reached for her bag, rummaging through it until she found a simple tunic and leggings. She dressed quickly, her mind spinning with questions as her fingers worked the familiar fastenings. Where was she? What realm had that unstable portal deposited her in? And why did it feel so foreign? Rose slung her bag over her shoulder and started walking towards the city, her bare feet sinking into the cool sand. As she drew closer, more details came into focus. Strange, horseless carriages zoomed along black rivers of stone. People milled about on the outskirts, dressed in unfamiliar fashions. And the noise? A constant hum of activity, of machinery and voices, so different from the usual din of the markets and cities she knew. She reached the edge of the city proper and paused, suddenly acutely aware of her own incongruity. Her simple clothing, her lack of shoes, her very bearing. Everything about her screamed outsider. For a moment, the weight of her situation crashed down on her. She was alone in a strange place with no idea where to go or who to trust. The pain of Lyra's betrayal was still a raw, gaping wound in her chest. Rose straightened, squaring her shoulders. She had faced worse than this and survived. She would figure this out, as she always did. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, melting into the flow of pedestrian traffic. She let the strange cadences of the language wash over her, picking out familiar words here and there. English, or something very like it. A language the Order had indeed trained her in, though she'd rarely had cause to use it. She would find her way. She would adapt, learn, survive, as she always had. But first, she needed information. She needed to understand where she was and what had brought her here. Rose scanned the storefronts and signs around her, looking for anything that might serve as a starting point. Her gaze landed on a small, unassuming building with a sign that read, Traverse City Public Library. A library. A repository of knowledge, of information. It was as good a place to start as any. With a nod to herself, Rose crossed the street, her strides purposeful. The journey ahead was uncertain, but she would face it as she faced everything, one step at a time. Rose stands frozen on the sidewalk, her eyes locked on the flashing sign. Shadow Realm Bar. The name echoes in her mind, conjuring up a flood of memories. Silas, her oldest friend, her staunchest ally. The one who had taken her in when she first arrived in Concordia, who had believed in her even when she hadn't believed in herself. But that was a lifetime ago. 80 years, if her calculations are correct. 80 years since she last saw him, since she stepped through that portal into a future she couldn't have predicted. Rose swallows hard, sudden nerves fluttering in her stomach. Silas would be older now, much older. While she has remained untouched by time's passage, he will have aged. Will he even recognize her? Will he remember the bond they once shared? And even if he does, will he believe it's really her? After so long, he must have thought her dead, lost to one of the many dangers she'd faced. How can she convince him that she's real, that she's finally found her way back? Rose shakes her head, pushing down the doubts. She has to try. In this strange modern world, Silas is her only link to the past, to the life she knew. If anyone can help her make sense of what's happened, of where she goes from here, it's him. She takes a deep breath, steeling herself, and starts walking towards the bar. Each step feels heavy, weighted with the burden of the years that separate them. But she keeps going, driven by a need that goes beyond simple friendship. She needs answers, she needs guidance, and more than anything, after the pain of Lyra's betrayal, she needs someone she can trust. She just hopes that, after all this time, Silas can still be that someone. As she approaches the bar, Rose takes in the details. It's a solid, well-maintained building with a certain timeless quality that seems at odds with the modern city around it. The wood is dark and rich, the windows glinting with a warm, inviting light. It looks like a place of refuge, a sanctuary, just as Silas had promised all those years ago. Rose reaches for the door handle, her heart in her throat. She can hear the murmur of voices from inside, the clink of glasses, the soft strains of music, sounds that are at once foreign and achingly familiar. She hesitates, just for a moment. Then, with a surge of determination, she pushes the door open and steps inside. The interior of the bar is just as warm and inviting as the outside suggested. Rich, dark wood, soft lighting, the gleam of polished glass. It's a place that feels removed from the hustle of the city, a pocket of comfort and ease. Rose scans the room, her heart pounding. There are people scattered about, some at tables, some at the bar itself. Humans mostly, though she spots a few beings who are decidedly not. And there, behind the bar, a familiar figure, taller than most, broad-shouldered and solid. His hair is grey now, his face lined with the passage of years. But his eyes, when they meet hers across the room, his eyes are the same, warm, kind, and filled with a sudden, shocking recognition. Rose? The name falls from Silas's lips like a prayer, a question and a plea all in one. Rose feels her throat tighten, emotions she can't name welling up inside her. She takes a step forward, then another, closing the distance between them. "Hello, Silas," she manages, her voice shaking slightly. "It's been a while." A while. The understatement of the century. But what else can she say? How can she put into words the time that's passed, the experiences she's had, the wounds she carries? Silas is coming around the bar now, his steps slow, almost hesitant, as if he's afraid she'll disappear if he moves too quickly. Is it really you? He asks, his voice rough with emotion. After all this time? Rose nods, not trusting herself to speak. She takes another step, then stops, suddenly uncertain. But Silas doesn't hesitate. In 2 long strides, he's closed the distance between them and pulled her into a hug that's as fierce as it is gentle. "I thought I'd lost you," he murmurs into her hair. "I thought—" He trails off and Rose understands. She clings to him, to the solid, reassuring warmth of him, and feels something inside her crack open. "I'm here," she whispers, as much to herself as to him. "I'm here, Silas. And I need your help." There, in the warmth of the Shadow Realm bar, in the embrace of her oldest friend, Rose finally lets herself feel the weight of all that's happened. And for the first time since Lyra's betrayal, for the first time in longer than she can remember, she feels safe. As Silas leads her to a quiet corner of the bar, away from prying eyes, Rose can feel the weight of her past pressing down on her. The pain of Lyra's betrayal is still fresh, a raw, gaping wound that threatens to consume her. But it's more than that. It's the accumulation of all she's been through, the losses, the betrayals, the constant fight against the darkness that seems to follow her wherever she goes. She's been running for so long, pushing down her pain, her anger, her fear. But now, in the safety of Silas's presence, she can feel it, all bubbling to the surface. Silas settles her at a table, pressing a warm mug into her hands. "Talk to me, Rose," he says gently. "Tell me what's happened." And so she does. The words pour out of her, a torrential flood of emotions and experiences. She tells him about Eldermire, about Draven and Lyra, about the Black Dawn and their sinister plots. She talks until her throat is raw and her eyes are burning with unshed tears. Throughout it all, Silas listens. His expression is one of concern, of empathy, but also of a deep, unsettling recognition. When Rose finally falls silent, he reaches across the table and takes her hand. "Rose," he says softly, "what you're feeling. The anger, the pain, the sense of betrayal. It's understandable. More than that, it's human." Rose shakes her head. "But I'm not human, Silas. I'm something else. Something dangerous." Silas squeezes her hand. "You're Rose, but also a person who has been through more than most could imagine. It's okay to feel these things. It's okay to be angry, to be hurt." Rose feels something crack inside her at his words. A dam breaking, a flood of emotions she can no longer contain. But what if I let it consume me? What if I become like them, like Draven or Lyra? Silas is quiet for a long moment. When he speaks again, his words are measured, thoughtful. "Rose, the fact that you're asking these questions, that's what sets you apart. You've seen the darkness, you've felt its pull, but you've always chosen to fight it, to be something better." He leans forward, his eyes intense. "You have a choice, Rose. You always have. You can let your pain define you, let it twist you into something you're not. Or you can learn from it, grow from it. Use it to become stronger, wiser, more compassionate." Rose feels tears sliding down her cheeks. She's never cried in front of Silas before, never let herself be this vulnerable. But his words, his steadfast belief in her, it's a balm to her battered soul. "I don't know if I can," she whispers. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Silas smiles, a soft, understanding curve of his lips. "You are, Rose. You're the strongest person I know, and you don't have to do it alone. I'm here, and I'll be here for as long as you need me." Rose clutches his hand like a lifeline, and there, in the quiet corner of the Shadow Realm bar, she finally lets herself shatter. She cries for all she's lost, for all she's endured. She cries for the part of herself that died with each betrayal, each battle. She cries until she's hollow, empty, a vessel waiting to be filled. And then, slowly, painstakingly, she begins to piece herself back together. It's not easy. It's perhaps the hardest thing she's ever done. But with each shuddering breath, each whispered confession, she feels something shifting inside her. The darkness is still there, the anger and the pain. But it no longer feels like it's consuming her. Instead, it feels like fuel, a source of strength, of resilience. She's been through the fire, and she's emerged tempered. Not unscathed, but unbroken. As the night wears on and the tears finally run dry, Rose feels a new sense of clarity, of purpose. She knows who she is, a survivor, a fighter. She looks at Silas, at the man who has been her rock, her safe harbor. "Thank you," she says, and the words feel inadequate to express the depth of her gratitude. Silas just smiles, his eyes shining with warmth and pride. "Welcome back, Rose." And Rose. Rose smiles back. A real, genuine smile, perhaps the first in longer than she can remember. She's not okay. Not yet. But for the first time in a long, long time, she feels like she could be, because she's Rose. And she's finally ready to face her darkness, and to let her light shine through. Rose sat back in her chair, exhaustion settling into her bones like a deep, pervasive ache. The emotional catharsis, the unburdening of her pain, had left her feeling drained, but also strangely light, as if a weight she hadn't even known she was carrying had finally been lifted. Silas, ever attentive, seemed to sense her weariness. "You should rest," he said gently. "You've been through a lot. We can talk more in the morning." Rose nodded, a yawn catching her by surprise. "Rest sounds good," she admitted. "But my things—" She glanced down at her bag, at the worn leather that contained all her worldly possessions. Her armor, her whip, the tools of her trade, the thought of parting with them, even for a night, made her stomach clench with unease. Silas followed her gaze, understanding dawning on his face. "I can secure them for you," he offered. "Keep them safe until you're ready for them again." Rose hesitated, the old instinct to rely only on herself, warring with the bone-deep exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. But this was Silas. If she couldn't trust him, who could she trust? Slowly she nodded. "Okay, thank you." She started to hand over the bag, but then paused, remembering. "Wait, there's something else." She reached into the bag, her fingers closing around a small, cold object. When she withdrew her hand, she was holding a key. It was an unassuming thing, plain and unremarkable, but Rose knew better. "This is the key to Ultranatius's realm," she said quietly. It can't fall into the wrong hands." Silas's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't ask how she'd come by such a thing. Instead, he reached out, his hand steady and sure. "I'll take care of it," he promised. "It will be hidden away, safe, until it's needed." Rose handed him the key, and with it, a measure of the burden she'd been carrying. She trusted Silas. If he said the key would be safe, then it would be. She handed over her bag as well, trying to ignore the twinge of vulnerability that came with the action. It felt strange to be without her gear, her armor, like shedding a layer of skin, exposing something raw and new underneath. But maybe that was okay. Maybe for now that's what she needed to do. Silas took her things with a solemn nod, treating them with the reverence he knew they deserved. "Get some rest, Rose," he said softly. "We can talk more in the morning. About what comes next." What comes next? The future, uncharted and uncertain. It was a daunting thought. But for the first time in a long time, Rose found herself looking forward to it. Because she wasn't just a warrior anymore, a weapon forged in the fires of adversity. She was a person, with hopes and dreams and a chance at a life beyond the battlefield. She was Rose. and she was ready to find out who that could be. With a final grateful smile at Silas, she made her way to the room he'd prepared for her. It was simple but comfortable, with a soft bed and a window that looked out over the quiet streets of Traverse City. Rose undressed slowly, letting her clothes fall to the floor in a haphazard pile. She'd worry about them in the morning. For now, all she wanted was to sink into the clean sheets, to let sleep claim her. As she lay down, her body moulding to the mattress, she felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. It was unfamiliar, this feeling of safety, of being cared for. But it was welcome. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of the future, of the possibilities that lay ahead now that she was free to choose her own path. She was Rose, and she was finally ready to bloom.